In this video, I'm going to teach you about the self-promotion bait strategy and how it's all wrapped up in one key question that I ask on every single podcast episode, never missed it, and why it has led to thousands of new potential listeners every single month. In fact, this one question is so powerful that it is the main reason why companies in my space with big email lists, big audiences will promote and share my podcast out with that audience. So it is one question, but 3 steps involved. Okay, so the first step is to ask the question. So the question that I always ask, I never miss, is that at the end of each episode, each podcast episode, I will always ask my guests, what is their recommended tools? What kind of tools do they recommend? What kind of apps do they recommend? What kind of companies? What kind of services do they recommend? What kind of books do they recommend the listeners out there? And usually I'll spend like 5 minutes out of like a 45-minute, hour-long podcast talking about the recommendations that my guest has. And trust me, my listeners and your listeners are going to love this question because they all love getting recommendations on what to do next. What are some of the best things that the best people in the space use, right? It's a great question. Lots of my listeners love it, but it serves a greater purpose for me in terms of marketing and promoting my podcast. So now once you ask that question, here's where the magic happens. We move on to step 2, which is to find the contact information for all the companies that were recommended by your guests on your podcast. Usually if it's a big company, I'll look for the CMO, the chief marketing officer, or somebody who works in their press or the public relations department. If it's a smaller company, I'll look for the founder or CEO, someone that basically is going to make decisions about the marketing of their business. And then I'll tell them that, hey, a guest on my podcast recommended your app, recommended your tool, recommended your company, and so forth. And they'll be ecstatic, right? Everyone loves people saying great things about them, great things about their company. So first of all, it's a great way to build a relationship with companies and shakers and movers and influencers and big companies in your space. So first of all, they'll be super ecstatic. Now, I don't just say, hey, by the way, someone mentioned you on my podcast and be done with it. I add a little more value than that. So step number 3 is to give them more context. So when I reach out to them, I will tell them, hey, this is the part of the podcast, this is the timestamp in the podcast where they said something about your company, and also include transcript, the one sentence, couple sentences, paragraph of them saying great things about the company that I'm emailing. The idea behind this is that a lot of these companies, right, the people that work here are super busy. They're probably not going to listen to the entire episode, but if they can at least hear the awesome part of your, the part where they said something awesome about their company, they'll at least tune into that part, they'll at least read the transcript, and usually that is enough for them to want to promote the episode. They'll share it on social media for sure. They might email it to the email list. They will promote the podcast for you because they have somebody saying great things about their company on your podcast. Now, usually I'll get like 5 to 10 recommendations from the podcast guest, and then about 2 to 3 of the companies I reach out to will actually promote the podcast for me on their email list on social media. And usually these companies have big audiences. They'll have thousands of people on the email list, thousands of followers, tens of thousands of followers on their email list and social media. And it really puts my podcast in front of thousands of potential new listeners every single episode. Not just that, but if it's 2 or 3 different companies that are willing to promote it, that's 2, 3, 4, multiple thousands of new listeners potentially tuning into my podcast. Or at least check out the podcast, right? Basically getting your podcast in front of thousands of potential new listeners. So you can repeat this strategy over and over again for every single episode you put out there, potentially getting your podcast out in front of audiences for 2 to 3 different companies, thousands of potential new listeners every single week, and you get to be in the good graces of a lot of these companies, build great relationships with them, so great win-win for all parties. And again, it all comes down to asking this one question on every single episode, which is for your podcast guest lists of recommendations, recommended apps, recommended tools, books, companies, services, whatever you can think of that's applicable for your space. Now, hopefully that helped you out. Now, if you want more help with launching or growing a podcast so that you can attract an audience of ideal listeners and ideal clients, then I set aside 45-minute slots on my calendar for a podcast strategy call with you. On this podcast strategy call, we'll learn more about your business goals, the issues your business is facing, and how podcasts can fit in all of this and help fix a lot of those problems and help you reach your goals. And maybe podcasting might not be the best fit. If it is not, I'll tell you that on the call as well. And there's no obligation at all to buy anything at the end of this call. It's really just to learn more about you, for you to learn more about me, to see if it can be a good fit. If you are a good fit and you want to work with me, I'll tell you more about how it all works in my program on that call, answer any questions you have on that call. And worst case scenario, you walk away with more clarity on how podcasting fits in with your business and more clarity on your podcast strategy. But it all starts off with the podcast strategy call, 45-minute, no cost, no obligation. If you want to book a time with me, all you gotta do is click the link below and you'll be taken to a page where you can book a time with me, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.